High Middle Ages, Peter Nears. Peter Nears was one of the most disgusting serial killers in history and had one of the most painful executions ever. He committed 544 murders, but it's who and how he killed that's really sickening. For example, out of these 544, 24 were unborn babies who were taken from the wombs of pregnant women. He used to do this for cannibalism and black magic rituals. He was part of a loose network of gangs who lived outside cities and attacked travelers, even though sometimes they organized larger raids. Stories said that another gang leader taught Nears that to become invisible, he needed to carry a special bag filled with magical objects, and fetuses were claimed to be one of the ingredients for these spells. Some tales said their hearts were eaten during rituals, and that their fat was made into candles that should have put people into deep sleep so thieves could rob their homes unnoticed. Authorities first caught him in 1577 and tortured him, making him confess to 75 murders. But he managed to escape until years later, when he left his magic bag at an inn, with hands and hearts from unborn babies inside. This time, they captured him and decided to execute him, but as I mentioned, his execution was probably one of the worst in history. On the first day, strips were torn from his body and boiling oil was poured into the wounds. On the second day, his feet were covered with hot oil and held over glowing coals. Lastly, on the third day, he was taken to the execution site and tied to a big wooden wheel. The executioner hit him with an iron bar 42 times, but even after all that, he was still alive. So to finish the execution, they cut him into 4 parts. It's likely that the total number of murders blamed on him was exaggerated, since they were confessed under torture, but the entire thing was brutal nonetheless. Early modern era. Peter Stump. Peter Stump, often called the Werewolf of Bedburg, was a German farmer accused of crimes so shocking that his story spread across Europe. Under torture, he confessed that he had practiced black magic since the age of 12. He said the devil gave him a magical belt that allowed him to change into a wolf, and according to his confession, he killed livestock and people, more specifically, 14 children and 2 pregnant women. He claimed he took unborn babies from their mother's wombs and ate their hearts while they were still warm, calling them delicacies. Among his victims, he even admitted to killing his own son and eating his brain. He was also accused of incest with his daughter Beale, who was then executed with him. Saying that he was sent by the devil himself, the locals prepared a pretty bad execution. First, his flesh was torn in 10 places with red-hot pincers, and then his arms and legs were smashed with the blunt side of an axe. After that, he was beheaded and burned. Lastly, the authorities raised a tall pole displaying the wooden wheel that he was tied to, a carved figure of a wolf and his severed head on top. 19th century. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was the nickname given by newspapers to an unknown killer in London, who mainly targeted poor women working as prostitutes. His method of killing led many to think that he might have been a medic, or at least that he had some sort of medical knowledge. That's because at least 3 of his victims had missing organs. Rumors spread, and newspapers kept receiving letters from people claiming to be Jack the Ripper, but none were really confirmed. The only kind of believable one was a letter called From Hell, which arrived with half of a human kidney. Even though we can't be sure it was actually him, the writer said he had fried and eaten it. It's also difficult to know which murders were attributable to him, but there are 5 victims who were most likely connected, called the Canonical 5. They all had a similar crime scene. The victim's throat was cut, mutilations were performed, and in some cases, the organs were missing or spread around the room. The police interviewed thousands of people, tracked hundreds, and detained dozens. Meanwhile, a local vigilante group patrolled the streets, offered rewards, and even hired private detectives, but the evidence never revealed a clear suspect. To this day, the true identity of Jack the Ripper is still unknown. Early 20th century. Albert Fish. Also known as the Gray Man, he is considered by many to be the worst serial killer of all time. Not because of the number of victims he caused, but because of what he did. He had a troubled life since childhood. When his father died suddenly of a heart attack, his mother placed him in St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C. There, he was beaten regularly, and instead of hating it, he learned to enjoy the pain. Fortunately, after his mother got a government job, she was able to bring him back home, but the psychological damage was already done. When he was really young, he started spending weekends at public baths so he could watch boys undress. Then, by 1890, he had moved to New York, where he worked as a male prostitute and began doing stuff I can't say to very young boys, often under 6 years old. His first plan to murder someone came in 1910, when a lover took him to a wax museum, unintentionally causing him to become obsessed with sexual mutilation. He lured a 19-year-old to an abandoned farmhouse, where he tortured him for 2 weeks and cut off half of his privates. He initially planned to kill him and take him home, but he changed his mind because the hot weather might have caused the body to smell, bringing attention to it. Instead, he left left a $10 bill, kissed Bedin goodbye, and left on a train. In 1917, his wife left him for another man, leaving him to raise their 6 children alone, and it's around this time that he began hearing voices. For example, one time he wrapped himself in a carpet and said he was following the Apostle John. He also began extreme acts against himself. When doctors later x-rayed him, they found at least 29 needles stuck deep inside his pelvic region. He made a paddle covered in nails and used it against himself, or encouraged his kids and their friends to use it on him. Over the years, he began claiming that God was commanding him to commit heinous acts against children, and tried multiple times to lure them, even though he failed. Then, on May 25, 1928, the event that led to his most notorious murder occurred. He saw a newspaper ad placed by 18-year-old Edward Budd, who was looking for work. He went to his home a couple of days later, posing as a wealthy farmer. He initially planned to attack Edward himself, but then, after seeing his 10-year-old sister Grace, he changed his plan. Pretending he was taking her to a birthday party, he convinced her parents to let her go with him. Instead, he took Grace to an abandoned house and did something which I won't explain. An important piece of context is that Albert Fish, by that time, was a cannibal. The case was initially unsolved for about 6 years. They did arrest someone initially, but because he was the wrong person, he was acquitted after spending 108 days in jail. The case had a turning point in 1934, when Grace's parents received a horrifying anonymous letter. Her mother could not read, so her son read it aloud. It described Grace's abduction and what followed in detail that only the killer could know. The letter's envelope carried the initials NYPCBA, which traced back to the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. Detectives went to the association and discovered that a janitor who worked there had stolen some of their stationery and brought it back to the boarding house where he lived. When the janitor later moved out, he left the leftover stationery behind. The landlady of the boarding house then told police that Albert Fish had recently rented that same room. This link between the stolen stationery and Fish's stay at the boarding house was enough for investigators to trace the letter back to him, which led to his arrest. After his arrest, other cases came to light, with more child victims. His own stepdaughter described disturbing games he had forced the children to play. During his trial, he pleaded insanity, saying that God's voice had told him to kill them. A psychiatrist said Fish believed he was reenacting the biblical story of Abraham and Isaac, thinking that if God did not want him to kill, angels would stop him. He also said Fish associated cannibalism with Holy Communion. The jury later said that none of them doubted Fish was insane, but they agreed he should be executed. He was found guilty, and on January 16, 1936, he was executed in the electric chair. Witnesses said he even helped the executioner adjust the electrodes, and that his last words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." After the execution, his lawyer revealed that Fish had written a final statement, but he refused to share it, saying it was the filthiest thing he had ever read. Fish himself admitted to sexually assaulting more than 100 boys. Late 20th century, Andrei Chikatilo. Also known as the Butcher of Rostov, he was born in rural Ukraine during a terrible famine. His family lived in a one-room hut, survived on almost no food, and endured bombings and occupation during World War II. His father was conscripted into the army and later captured, and he was bullied for bedwetting and being very nearsighted. As a teenager, he struggled with severe sexual problems and anxiety around people, while during his adulthood, he switched many jobs, from being in a Soviet Army communications unit to a teacher. He finally settled down near Rostov when he married his wife, with whom he had 2 children. However, just about 15 years later, he committed his first murder, a 9-year-old girl. Although evidence pointed to him, police arrested another man, Alexander Kravchenko, who was convicted after a forced confession and unfortunately wrongly executed. Chikatilo, still free, began killing again. He developed a pattern. He approached vulnerable victims like kids or homeless people, gained their trust with offers of food, money, or help in general, and then led them to hidden places. A strange detail that helped investigators link cases was that several victims had damage to their eyes. Then, he murdered a mother and daughter he knew, and this time, police gathered useful witness descriptions and biological samples. That same year, he was finally detained at a bus station with a knife, rope, and Vaseline, but he was released because his blood type was listed as type A, while a sample found at crime scenes was typed as AB, so investigators thought it couldn't be him. He was just jailed for 3 months for theft, expelled from the Communist Party, and released. Luckily, though, the case moved forward thanks to psychiatrist Alexander Bukhanovsky, who wrote a 65-page profile describing the killer as a middle-aged, educated, married man with a traumatic childhood, sexual problems, who traveled for work and killed on a schedule. The profile fit Chikatilo almost perfectly. Killings slowed for a while, but from 1988 to 1990 he resumed, murdering several people in quick succession. Media coverage grew intense, and the police set a trap along the rail lines where he often hunted. They flooded big stations with uniformed officers to force him toward specific stops to avoid the police, where undercover agents then questioned any man seen with a lone woman or child and recorded his name. Chikatilo struck once again and killed a 22-year-old woman near Don Lescau's station, but an undercover officer noticed a well-dressed man leaving the woods with mud on his sleeves and a finger injury. He checked his papers and recorded his name. Then, a week later, when the woman's body was found, investigators read his name and put him under surveillance. He was seen trying to approach women and children, so on November 20th, he was arrested. He carried a knife and rope, and his finger wound matched a recent fight. At first, Chikatilo denied the murders, but on November 29th, Dr. Bukanovsky, the same psychiatrist who profiled him earlier, joined the questioning. He broke through Chikatilo's defenses, and within hours he confessed. He gave detailed accounts of 36 murders already known to police, then confessed to 20 more. In 1991, a 60-day psychiatric evaluation concluded that he had a borderline personality disorder with sadistic traits, but that he was mentally fit to stand trial. His trial became a huge media event. Since victims' families were enraged, Chikatilo had to sit inside a metal cage, and his behavior in court was weird, as if he was acting insane, even though experts testified that he understood what he was doing and was just trying to avoid prison. The court found him guilty, and just 2 years later, on February 14, 1994, he was executed by a single gunshot. 21st century, Luis Alfredo Garavito. This guy was known as La Bestia, which means the beast, and there's a reason for that, given his at least 193 child victims. After a troubled childhood and adolescence with domestic violence, bullying, bad economic situations, and alcoholism, his mental state wasn't too stable. People who knew him said he seemed friendly when sober, but controlling and violent when drunk. He sometimes went to church or Alcoholics Anonymous, saw psychiatrists, and cycled through depression, paranoia, and suicidal thoughts, but he had not yet begun killing. Then, in October 1992, his series of murders began. Often pretending to be an authority figure like a teacher or priest, he would approach poor boys to offer them small gifts, money, or jobs. He then led them to isolated places, where he killed them. Investigators understood the link between the murders because of some shared details, such as bindings, bottles of alcohol, and nylon cords. A major breakthrough came in February 1999 near Palmyra, where 3 boys were found close together. The killer had accidentally burned himself when nearby sugarcane caught fire, leaving behind clothing, a pair of prescription glasses, and other belongings. From the lenses and shoe wear, police could estimate the suspect's age, eye condition, height, and limb. These elements were enough for police to trace the evidence back to Garavito, who in the meantime tried to assault another boy. A nearby teenager and a young girl interrupted the attack and alerted police. Garavito gave a false name, but investigators already suspected him and confirmed his identity. DNA from his belongings matched samples from crime scenes, and his height, limp, and eye condition matched the profile. On October 28, 1999, he confessed and led police to several of the burial sites. Seeing how many people he killed, courts sentenced him to a total of 1,853 years, but Colombian law capped sentences at 40 years, and his effective term was further reduced to 22 years because he helped locate victims' remains. In 2021, he tried to ask for an early release, but it was rejected due to unpaid fines and other issues. He died on October 12, 2023, after a serious illness. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one, join my Discord, link in the description.